Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 803 for the 25th of February 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you this week from Central Oregon, the high desert in the city of Bend, Oregon. I'm here visiting my good friend Brian Dunning for a few days to enjoy this crisp, cool mountain air, or high desert air, and as you can hear, there's a very pleasant coating of snow, which is evaporating a little bit at the moment. I'm just walking out here in the morning. The sun has just come up. It's just above freezing, and I've come down to say hello to the horses here in the horse paddock. They're looking at me thinking, I hope this guy's bringing us some hay to eat. Let me see. Hello, horses. They're not very talkative today. Coming up on this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone podcast, I look at review a show that we've been mentioning here and there lately from 40 years ago. A show shown on Australian television about alternative medicine, a 6-part series called Healers Quacks or Mystics. And this show was discovered online by a listener, and it was really worth my while to watch every episode, 6 30-minute episodes, because it is a fascinating slice of Australian history when it comes to what we skeptics look at when it comes to alternative medicine. And we'll be discussing things like iridology and psychic surgery as I look back over some of the episodes of this show. It's so important now after 40 years to watch something like this, see what the thinking was at the time, and then think, well, okay, 40 years later, what have we learned? What has changed? What about the claims being made 40 years ago? As the horses stroll by. Hello. Crunching on the ice as they do. I hope you'll find this interesting. And just a note too, and you've probably noticed this over the last few weeks, when I'm on the run, on the move, moving about, doing the podcast, you will hear a variation in the sound quality and my voice, because I'm recording in different situations, in different rooms with different microphones. It's all fun. It's all fun, and I hope you enjoy the segments. Healers, quacks, or mystics, what have we learnt in the last 4 decades when it comes to claims of alternative medicine? And indeed, I'll link to the show in the show notes. And if you want, you can watch it for yourself. And I think you'll find it just as fascinating as I did. Following that, and it's a bit of an abbreviated show this week. Sometimes getting content on the run can be challenging. Anyway, following that, we go back to the Trove archives to continue our look into the interesting world of psychics, clairvoyants, mystics, mediums, that sort of thing. Oh, there's a little bird right over there on the field hopping around looking for seed. In fact, I'm going to walk around the path here, as I can hear lots of birds chirping in the trees as more of the sun's rays penetrate this area and the snow slowly starts to evaporate. Now, only yesterday here at Skeptoid headquarters, I had the pleasure of appearing with my friend Brian Dunning at the Surf Coast Skeptic Camp at beautiful Aries Inlet in Victoria. And that hookup was arranged by my friend Don Hyatt, and it was a great success. We had a wonderful time, and it was so nice for us here in Oregon to have the camera in Surf Coast in Aries Inlet turned towards the audience so we could see who we were talking to. And it was a thrill for me to see my good friends, especially Michelle Bickersma, who I noticed waving to me from the back of the room. Wonderful to see you, Michelle. I'm mentioning this because on next week's episode, we'll have some highlights of the talk that Brian Dunning and I gave to the crowd there at the Surf Coast Skeptic Camp. And congratulations to the organisers for putting all that together. But now it's time for me to... I'm going to come over to this bird bath here. It's not so much as a bird bath, it's... Oh, I've cracked the ice. It's a bird skating rink. Ow! Yeah. There's a couple of centimetres worth of ice there and a little bit of water underneath. I wonder if the birds come by and skate along. It's time for me to go back inside the warm Skeptoid headquarters, make myself a nice steaming hot cup of coffee. And while I do... just before I do that, I'm gazing towards the wonderful blue sky with scattered clouds, and there's a jet flying over at presumably about 11 kilometers, and the condensation trail is stark white and straight against the blue sky as it catches the rays of the sun. In its own way, it's quite beautiful. I'm going to have that coffee, and while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Healers, quacks, or mystics. This was a TV show in Australia, a 6-part documentary series in late 1983, and I've mentioned this show on the Skeptic Zone before. There was a Trove segment which mentioned this show, and also listener Mark Dawson wrote to me saying he had discovered the show online, and I will link to that in this week's show notes. Healers, Quacks or Mystics was a look at the alternative medicine industry and philosophies in Australia 40 years ago. It was uncritical. It was presented by Neville Jury. And Neville Jury, according to Wikipedia, born 1947, died 2013, was an English-born Australian editor and publisher, as well as the author of over 40 books on subjects ranging from shamanism and Western magical traditions to art, music, and anthropology. But it seems to me his interest in life, according to much of his writings and other documentaries he made, was the mysterious, the spiritual. Indeed, it lists his occupation here as pagan studies scholar. Despite taking a great interest in the alternative medicine of the era 40 years ago, sadly he died in 2013, aged only 66. And it says here he suffered various cancers and complications and was found to have advanced liver failure. Now, the reason I'm revisiting this series is because I sat down and I watched every episode. And it is a fascinating slice of history from the point of view of those of us involved in the skeptical movement. 40 years ago, what was the state of the situation when it came to alternative medicine in Australia? Now, the 6 episodes covered many different sorts of alternative medicines and modalities and ways of thinking. And I certainly haven't got time to do a review of every episode, but that's really not necessary. I will be covering some of the aspects of the show with the thought in mind that we are comparing it to what we know today. Episode 1 is called The New Healers, and apart from everything else it covers, it looks at naturopathy and iridology, and we'll get to that soon. Episode 2, called The Body Workers, looks at various alternative health movements and their relationship to massage. including the Alexander technique and Rolfing, and even mentions Reich therapy. Episode 3, The Breath of Life, to do with chi, prana, Reiki, that sort of things. The once popular idea of vitalism, although they don't use that term in this episode, the idea that there's some sort of mystical life force. And as Steve Novella points out from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, belief in vitalism decreased the more we understood the mechanisms of the human body, until there was simply no need for a belief in this anymore. This is still a very widely held belief, however. Chi, prana, mystical energies, life force energies. Episode 4 is called Mind the Healer, Mind the Slayer, and looks at cancer sufferers using meditation to cure their cancer. That's a fascinating episode. Episode 5 is called The Hidden Potential and explores self-hypnosis. Finally, episode 6, one of the most dramatic episodes, looks at spiritual healing and psychic surgery. The shonk, the scam, the con, the deceit, the thoroughly evil practice of pretending to do surgery on the poor victims and pretending to remove infected tumors and bodily tissue and things like that. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Here is how each episode started.
All the powers of healing, that I will help the sick. I will be chaste and religious in my life and in my practice. I will abstain from harming or wronging any man.
We've been brought up, go to the doctor, get a pill. Anything's the matter, don't look towards yourself to help. Get somebody else to do it. The reliance we have outside of ourselves is quite frightening. I'm learning, and I'm still learning, to rely on me, to tap my sources, not somebody else's.
This is Marion Fine. In her own way, she's part of an alternative approach which stresses the patient's role in healthcare.
And there we even had a little clip there from the beginning of one of the episodes, which gives you a flavour of what the series was about. It was largely based on testimonials, stories. I know it works because it worked for me. This happened to me, so I know it works. Here's what people claim. And somehow Neville Jury distorts this into, since people claim this, it must be true. It's a very interesting effect, or it's an interesting angle he takes in this series. The series does look at various alternative practitioners, but it does talk to a lot of everyday people who are undergoing the various treatments, and that in itself is a fascinating look into psychology. So as mentioned before, episode 1 deals with some naturopathy and iridology. And they interview one Dorothy Hall, who was a very prominent figure in the alternative medicine movement here in Australia. She died in 2012. But what's fascinating about this particular episode is that the cameras are there when she's giving a consultation using iridology and a chart of the iris of the eye. Let's hear a little bit of that episode now.
This is Dorothy Hall's College of Herbal Medicine. The basic philosophy here is naturopathy.
We won't keep you a moment, it'll be about 5 minutes.
Naturopaths believe that each patient has their own doctor hiding inside. Discovering the healing power inside you often starts with a new way of thinking about disease and health.
Now, your sleep pattern. Do you go to sleep quickly and easily?
Like all naturopaths, Dorothy Hall places great importance on the way everyday habits, conflict at work, and emotional problems contribute to disease.
You happy with your life the way it is at the moment?
Not particularly, in the sense that up till now I've been following what I thought a career pattern and hoping that that would define my goals along the way. And that's not really happening at the moment. It's
What about your own goals from inside? I mean, are they defined?
No, I feel at the moment that they're not very defined.
Okay, I'll have a look at your eyes now and see if we can find any more to clear up some of these details here.
For Dorothy Hall, the iris is a detailed map of a person's state of health and well-being. She claims the iris is divided into 96 zones, and colour changes in these zones indicate disease in specific organs of the body, like the heart, the lungs, and the liver.
Interesting, that glandular fever that you had left quite a mark on your liver. I wouldn't be surprised if that's still a little bit enlarged. You've got a psoric spot over the liver zone there and a very deep nerve ring that can often mean a soreness, a distress around this area at times. Do you notice that with your rowing occasionally?
Not when I've been rowing, no.
Science regards iridology as pseudo-medical quackery, but Dorothy Hall is convinced that a patient's problems will show clearly in the iris.
Liver function tests.
We still have much to learn about the true meaning of the eye.
You can learn an awful lot about a person from an eyeball-to-eyeball contact. If you black out the eyes in a photograph, say, immediately you've got very little idea of what that person is really about. But you could also call the eye the mirror, not so much of the soul as perhaps even the seat of the physiological brain. Now, I'm waiting for some anatomist in the future to find that your brain isn't in your head, it's in your iris.
Now, I'd like to point out that what Dorothy Hall was saying there about future scientists or future researchers will discover this, this, or this. And that's what a lot of people firmly believed. And they still believe that any day now science will catch up to what they know is true. And one of the most important things about viewing something from 40 years ago is we have 40 years now of experience and research. And we know, without any real reasonable doubt, that iridology, for example, is a nonsense and cannot work. So we can say that, therefore, any information gleaned about a patient from Dorothy Hall at the time, or even from an iridologist today, cannot be from reading the iris, because that does not work. So we can ponder how else the information would come. I surmise that a lot of it is simply by the practitioner asking questions, like a cold reader does, like a psychic on the stage does. Iridology itself is mentioned here also in Wikipedia. Iridology is an alternative medicine technique whose proponents claim that patterns, colors, and other characteristics of the iris can be examined to determine information about a patient's systemic health. Practitioners match their observations to iris charts, which divide the iris into zones that correspond to specific parts of the human body. It goes on to say, as opposed to evidence-based medicine, iridology is not supported by quality research studies and is considered pseudoscience. The features of the iris are one of the most stable features on the human body throughout life. The stability of iris structures is the foundation of biometric technology, which uses iris recognition for identification purposes. And again, I keep making the point, but we're looking at claims that were made 4 decades ago. If there was anything in iridology, we would know by now. After 40 years, or 4 decades, it's just no good for the iridologist to say, possibly, that it works. It's just that the scientific community are covering it up or hushing it up, and they don't want this to be known. That is a very tired, old argument. So let's now jump ahead and look at some of the claims made in the final episode about spiritual healing and psychic surgery. The cameras are there when one Chris Cole, who I have not heard about for some years, I don't know if she's still alive, performed psychic surgery. And it's worth seeing because you can really see how the psychic surgeons ply their trade. And now we know for sure, without any shadow of a doubt, that it's a magic trick. It's sleight of hand. Blood and little tissue samples are concealed within the hands of the psychic surgeon and produced magically as if they were coming out of the body. It's not a case of, can this work, or does this work, or this is mysterious. It's a case of, we know the magic trick, and it has been revealed many years ago by many people, including James Randi. And indeed, some years later, Chris Cole was the subject of an undercover report by A Current Affair, the Australian television news program, who sent cameras in to film her doing another series of psychic surgeons, and then consulted the Australian skeptics at the time, around about 2004, 2005, maybe earlier. I don't have a date on the program. And former president of the Australian Skeptics, Dr. Richard Gordon, was scathing. And they also spoke to Sean Taylor, who is a wonderful magician, and he pointed out clearly the sleight of hand being used. So episode 6 of the series, if you follow the link, that's one worth watching to see a psychic surgeon in action. So now we turn via the Trove archives to the Canberra Times on the 12th of December 1983 in the television review segment, where the reviewer, Ian Warden, writes the following about the program. I speculated some time ago that we would wait a long while for Neville Jury to show us someone he thought was a quack in his Healers, Quacks or Mystics series, ABC, Thursdays, 8:55 p.m. And this continues to shape up as a very partisan series indeed. Last Thursday's program offered as proof of the belief that cancer can be cured by meditation the example of one man whose cancer disappeared after meditation organised by Melbourne psychiatrist Dr. Ainsley Mears. No one offered a sceptical voice, and Mr. Jury and his cameras did lots of opinionated things, including a passage at the end which showed the cured gentleman frolicking with his family in a golden billabong in some golden ideal, while idyllic music tinkled in the background. Mr. Jury, as is his wont, received a little massage and meditative instruction from his healer of the week, and should really be as fit as a flea by the last episode, which may feature a sympathetic look at a witch who claims, reasonably enough, to be able to cure warts by dabbing at them with a pickled tadpole by the light of a full moon. Well, it's good to see that at least one television reviewer at the time pointed out that there is scarcely, throughout the whole 6 episodes, scarcely any scientific skepticism expressed or any real investigation. The claims, more or less, are simply taken at face value and regarded as truth. So I end with my thought, which I keep coming back to, that this is a valuable series to have, to watch, to learn from. We have 4 decades now where we can examine the claims that were made at the time and see how they panned out. Many of the modalities have simply slipped into the realm of history, but some things still persist, like iridology and so on. And sadly, there are still psychic surgeons. Healers, Quacks or Mystics, you can watch the series for yourself. And again, I will link to that in this week's show notes.
Hello, this is Maynard speaking to you from my shirt. Did you know that you can listen to the Skeptic Zone on YouTube? That's right, the Skeptic Zone's on the internet now. Sounds crazy, but it's true. I checked. You can also hear 40 logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersmar and funny sketches with Richard Saunders and a host of other skeptics, and some that aren't. There's one that's not skeptical at all. They're totally incredulous about the whole thing. Want short bursts of skepticism? We have a TikTok channel covering things like talking to the dead. Hello? No, still nothing. Spoon bending and astrology. That's right, I was born under the sign of the photocopier. Looking for UFOs? Aren't we all? Hello? Then click on the link to watch the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. They don't want you to see it. That's right, and I've spoken to them, and they said it wasn't them, they said it was someone else. But stuff them. I'm going to click on the link and see it anyway. Oh, no. Oh, imagine my disappointment when I found out it was Brian Dunning. He's like the Jar Jar Binks of skepticism. Looking for UFOs? Oh, done that bit. All these and more are on the homepage at skepticzone.tv. Also, you can visit me, Maynard, at maynard.com.au for my adventures, for my alleged adventures, online video specials and free downloads. Yep, like a free, a free something. Like a free thing that arrives in your mailbox. Like a free catalogue it's as interesting as a free catalogue in your mailbox you didn't ask for. Online video specials and free downloads like the printable Maynard calendar for all of 2024. September's my favourite month. Yes, spend every month with me, or put it on the back of the toilet door of someone you don't like. I don't know.
Time once again to go back to those wonderful digital archives where the story of society is written in the newspapers of the day, and many years, decades, even centuries later, we can have a look to see what people were thinking, what they were reporting on. And currently, over the last few weeks, we've been looking at reports of psychics, clairvoyants, mystics, astrologers, that sort of thing. And we will continue this week with a series of reports about various psychics and astrologers and mystics and clairvoyants and mediums as reported on in the pages of Australian newspapers. And I'm reminded of the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project when I see this first story that's come up from December the 31st, 1978, in the pages of the Sydney Morning Herald. The big news of 1979. What the Seers Foretell, by Barbara Marvich. Let's see, 1979. I was in high school, and I think I can remember what was happening more or less at that time. Curiosity about the future is always more intense at the end of the year. Everyone wants to know what the new year will bring. If we had a magic crystal ball, the task would be easy. But as the next best thing, the Sun Herald sought the predictions of two of Australia's best-known astrologers, Richard Sterling and Stella Recamier. I think that's pronounced, and many apologies, I think that's a French name, and I think it's pronounced Recamier. And leading clairvoyant, Rosemary Marriott, who we mentioned last week. Read below what they think about Australia in 1979. Then cut out this article and keep it to see if what they say comes true. I wonder if anyone did. That's one of the things we discovered in the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project is newspapers and radio shows and TV chat shows are very happy to have so-called mystics and psychics on at the end of the year. And they never haul them back to say, well, here's how you did last year. They simply don't care. Richard Sterling, astrologer. Australia can expect a very interesting year in 1979. It's a turning point for the nation. I don't recall it being a turning point, never mind. Since early 1976, We have been going through an awful planetary combination which has brought chaos, confusion, and been generally debilitating. It has brought the country to its knees. I don't recall those years being so terrible. This slow-moving pattern is finally moving away, and the country is entering a convalescent period. The pattern now is conservative, realistic, cautious, and relates to cutbacks and decreases. Unemployment will be up very much and will still be a major weapon against inflation and rising prices, which will come down. There will be severe regulations on government spending until August, when the relative influences move away. This could mean that the next budget will show unexpected increases in government expenditure. From 1980 onwards, Australia as a nation really comes good. It will be a terribly optimistic time. One of the specific things I see are some serious connections between young people and drugs. I think the whole drug problem will be highlighted next year. Many more illegal immigrants will come into the country, especially through Darwin, which is badly affected. New foreign virus strains will be introduced, perhaps foot and mouth disease, and will affect our cattle industry. Foot and mouth disease, to my best knowledge, has never been found in Australia. Many Australians will be upset about the immigrant situation, but the government won't be able to find an easy solution to the problem. There will be utter chaos around airport facilities. Perth and the surrounding areas will have an acute water shortage, and defects in buildings and bridges will cause many troubles. The Sydney area will have periods of extremely heavy rain and severe floods, which may damage roads and rail links. In October-November, a very bad planetary combination will affect communication. It will be a whopper of a strike, affecting either mail, phones, or one of the transport systems. The Sydney area can also expect an event of massive scale to occur between now and August. It has something to do with annihilation and transformation and mass power. It could be bad weather or mass demonstrations or something totally different. Okay. I honestly don't know, it says. It has been about 250 years since this same planetary combination last occurred. Oh, okay. Who's going to volunteer to look up the year 1979 in Australia to see how that all came, if that came true or not? I think if we were still doing the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, and I know some of my team are listening, what do you think, team? I think some of those were simply too vague. They'd be in the too vague column. And many are simply, I would guess, wrong. Stella Recamier, astrologer. 1979 will be another year for big strikes, as in trade union strikes, I think she means there. At the end of March and into early April, strikes will further disrupt our transport system. I think it will be a petrol shortage. In April, there could be a waterfront workers' strike. In July, industrial problems will threaten our food supply. There will be trouble in the public service, and restaurant employees will push for higher wages. In November, there could be a big postal strike. On the finance scene, any decrease in interest rates will be minimal and will be offset at the end of the year by a sharp increase. There is good news in real estate, with property values up in the second half of the year. The car industry will be healthy, especially in the last 8 weeks of the year. Teachers will be on the defensive and will voice criticism of our education system in March. Unemployment will reach 1 million by late 1980, which will intensify problems between the workforce and the government. Australia will be floating in a mini boom in late 1979, but this will prove false in retrospect. The buoyant atmosphere will, however, increase our foreign trade around that time. Meat exports will face a deadlock in early 1979, but later in the year there will be lucrative new export contracts. A woman already in Australian politics will rise to prominence in 1980, and only in that year can we expect significant benefits in welfare for women and children. The rural industry will also receive a boost then. I also predict more mysterious disappearances of aircraft in the Bermuda Triangle and in the Pacific this year. I guess that's something which would be hopefully relatively easy to research after all these years. The likely times are February to March, July and October. Late May and the first few days of June will be dangerous for air travel in small aircraft. I'll just stop there and comment that if in late May and the first few days of June there was a light aircraft crashed in Australia or something like that, she could say, yes, see, I can really tell the future. If nothing happened, she could still say, yes, but it was a dangerous time. But luckily, nothing happened. We read on. Hollywood will produce its biggest blockbuster yet in 1979. I'd have to look at a list of movies released that year. I don't think anything would eclipse Star Wars for quite some time. There are marriages for Elizabeth Taylor in March-June, and Richard Burton's health problems will create concern in February-May. His marriage will not fare happily then, and it is on the decline. If this wife has a child, the marriage may be prolonged for about 2 years. Now, I won't bother, but I think that's all easily researchable, all those predictions. Jackie Onassis will have a marriage proposal in the second quarter of the year, but any romance she takes on will be doomed by the end of 1980. And finally, we come to Rosemary Marriott, clairvoyant, who was the subject, or one of the subjects of last week's show. The biggest thing next year will be a fantastic breakthrough in medical science. It will involve the transplantation of the thyroid and the mastering of a new way to overcome completely the rejection of foreign organs. Oh, no, and if only, that would have been great. This will have great implications for all transplant operations from now on, and there will be new hope for all sufferers of thyroid complaints, including cretin children. Again, a term we don't use anymore. I think the discovery will come from overseas, but Australia will be a part of it. The name of the doctor will be something like Werner or Werner. During the middle of the year, there will be trouble with an outbreak of influenza. There could be a thyroid scare, as well as a massive breakout of disease like measles or polio. It is imperative that parents have their children immunized. At last, a bit of good advice. The major thing for Australia next year will be the opening up of Western Australia with an enormous diamond find, as well as a substantial oil find on the northwest shelf. These will both ultimately provide thousands of jobs for people, and new cities will spring up. These should both make the news in late 1979, 1980. There will be discoveries also of uranium, copper and gold. The mining market will enjoy a great boom late in 1979-1980. The export scene is good also, with wheat heading the list. Wool, sugar and meat all have good prospects, but we'll have to be extremely careful of the situation in the Middle East. Inflation will be down to about 5 or 6%, and 1979 is a great time for the small businessman to get started. The best areas are anything to do with health food stores, squash courts, organic fruit and vegetables, etc., or books. The nation will become very healthy and diet conscious next year. Stamp and coin collecting will also prove profitable. Gambling will come to many Australian cities in a big way. In South Australia, there will be a huge hard drug haul, and children will be involved. There will be a lot of tanker trouble throughout the year. Tankers will be involved in many accidents, and new legislation may have to be drafted to cover them. And I think here what she means, would be road trucks, big trucks, tankers. People thinking of having cosmetic surgery should do so quickly because it soon won't be covered by Medibank. Bob Hawke will make a big run into federal politics between 1979 and 1982, and in America, Edward Kennedy will make a big push for power. The folk singing trio, Peter, Paul and Mary, will make a comeback. There is a very high fire risk for shopping centres and houses from May to July. Bad areas are Wollongong, Bondi, King's Cross, Glebe and Paddington. A list of predictions for 1979, and again, we could go back and research all those, although at the moment I'm not particularly inclined to do it. You, dear listener, may have some fun having a look at some of those predictions. Now we have something from 1987, and it even mentions Timendum. Like a psychedelic dream. And the included photograph is a bit grainy, but it's a photograph of a man. It says Gary Wiseman, who, if memory serves, posed as a psychic or an astrologer or a clairvoyant or something like that. People who experience astral travel say they leave their physical body but remain connected to it by a silver cord. The most common experiences of being on the outside looking in are unexpected and occur during dreams and operations. While for most it is a harmless experience, some believe it could be dangerous if abused. Astrologer Gary Wiseman said a man who astral travelled told him a few years ago of a frightening experience of not being able to re-enter his body for 6 hours. It floored him for years, recalled Wiseman. There have been cases of people who start to feel that they are immortal, that they can fly. I heard of a case in England where a man believed he could fly because he used to do so when he astral travelled. He dived out of the window and broke nearly every bone in his body. He said it was like a psychedelic dream, and people could get hooked on it. A spokesman for the Australian Skeptics said the organisation considered astral travelling as nothing more than a hallucination or a daydream. Tim Mendham said research done overseas with people claiming to have projected themselves astrally showed they had all travelled to places they had experienced before. It's very difficult to disprove, he said. The people tested had all been to the places they had either actually visited or experienced through books or television. Fred Grigg from Sydney's Mandate Missionaries, an organisation devoted to helping people involved in cult groups, said a few groups regularly practiced astral travelling. There are 2 types of astral projection, he said. The first is where someone has a spontaneous experience, and the second is done consciously, induced by hypnosis or drugs. It is fraught with danger. It can cause heart failure and lead to people developing neurosis. And finally, a rather sad story, I must say, from the Sydney Morning Herald dated the 2nd of July, 1986. And this involves a missing boy at the time. Police reject psychic's help on missing boy. Police investigating the disappearance of the 8-year-old Albury boy, John Purtell, say their investigations are being hampered by people claiming to be clairvoyants and psychics. Superintendent Bob Bradbury of the CIB said yesterday the calls were only creating difficulties by tying up phone lines. We give no credibility at all to these people, and we don't use them in our investigations, he said. It is now 11 days since John went missing after playing in a Saturday football carnival at Griffith's Jubilee Park. An appeal for people to come forward with videos or photographs taken at the ground that day has met with some response. In Albury yesterday, 8 detectives, including members of the Sydney Homicide Squad, were still interviewing people who were at the football ground when John disappeared. An identikit picture of a man seen in the men's shower block before John went missing has produced some possible leads. 18 members of the Tactical Response Group spent yesterday continuing a search around the shores of Lake Wyngan Griffith, where the bodies of Mark Mott, 12, and Ralph Burns, 11, believed murdered, were found late last year. And the sad update to that story was not too long after police made an arrest, and the one man was responsible for those murders, including the unfortunate John Pertell. But of course, the message here, as the Chief Superintendent Bob Bradbury said at the time, we give no credibility at all to these people, and we don't want to use them in our investigations, and that they were only creating difficulties by tying up the phone lines. Well, there we are. Not the most happiest of stories to end this Trove section on, but nevertheless an interesting little roundup of reports of psychics and clairvoyants and mystics and whatnot in the pages of Australian newspapers going back many decades. And don't forget that you too can enjoy many interesting hours perusing the online archives, no matter where you are in the world, but especially if you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. Have a search, because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. I've come out again to make sure the horses are okay. Yes, they're very well. Although it does surprise me that in these conditions when it's below freezing, that the horses seem to just happily spend the night outside. But they do have thick winter coats on, I must say. As I mentioned at the top of the show, coming up on next week's episode, highlights from the talk that Brian Dunning and I gave at the Surf Coast Skeptic Camp, where Brian will discuss his documentary movies, and we both talk about our adventures into skepticism and why we came to make podcasts. What an enjoyable time we had. Brian and I here with the camera set up on the table. We had a couple of nice drinks, and we just chatted to the audience and chatted to each other, took questions from the audience. A very, very pleasant way to spend an hour or so. Also on next week's episode, apart from anything else, which we have to wait and see what that's going to... Oh, there's a bird. It's come down to inspect the bird skating rink. Apart from anything else, we continue our series on Trove, looking into clairvoyants, mediums, mystics, people who think they can talk to the dead or pretend to talk to the dead. I find that endlessly fascinating. Just so beautiful here. The air is so crisp, and there's a wonderful, indescribable, bracing chill in the air, which I find is very pleasant indeed. So from this wonderful little corner of the world, this is Richard Saunders signing off.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.